House Bill 3 by Leader Lamberth and others relative to lifetime orders of protection.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move passage of House Bill 7003 on third and final consideration.
Leader Lamberth moves passage. Bogman second. Ms. Clerk, call up First Amendment.
House Civil Justice Committee Amendment number 1.
Chairman Farmer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment rewrites the bill. Move to adopt and defer to the sponsor for further explanation.
Chairman Farmer moves adoption of amendment number 1. Properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of amendment number 1 say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You adopted. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is just a cleanup, but it is an important one from something we left out about a year and a half ago. Nikki Goeser, many of you have met her over the years. Her husband was killed right in front of her several years ago. And while that evil person was serving time in prison, he continued to send her letters and notes and tried to continue to harass her. She came to me and said, why should she have to go every single year back to court and renew an order of protection? And I said, ma'am, I don't know, because that person should never be in contact with her. He killed her husband. So we created a lifetime order of protection for convicted felons that have committed violent crimes. A judge reached out to me a couple of months ago and said, look, if you are going to have a special session and it's going to be about public safety and the call allows for it, why not have aggravated stalking as something that if somebody is convicted of that felony and they are stalking someone, which many, many times, if that act is not interrupted, it does lead to a serious assault or death. Why not do a lifetime order of protection for folks convicted of aggravated stalking once they've gone through the entire criminal justice system and been convicted, so that the victim doesn't have to come back every single year and look into the eyes of that stalker to try to get the order of protection renewed. We put provisions in here that if that stalking crime is ever pardoned or if it is set aside by the court, that the individual under the order of protection could come back and ask for this to be lifted. But other than that, this would be a lifetime order of protection to protect those victims. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Leader Lamberth renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know we heard this in Civil Justice Committee, and I just wanted to ask, because I know there was an amendment, and I believe that amendment's been included. So are we now allowing this person, I know you, and I agree with your problem that you're trying to solve and supported that original legislation, but there was a amendment that was added in the committee that I voted no on that would allow this person who is a stalker to come back and be able to have the right to purchase and own firearms. Is that still in this bill? Is that correct?
Leader Lamberth.
No, not entirely. So right now, a judge would review these every single year. The victim would have to go back to court and have to get it renewed. Well, usually as time goes by, it gets harder and harder for the judge to just grant it year after year after year. And a lot of times the victims get weary, they get tired, they get intimidated by having to come to court every year. With this is an extraordinary measure. This is a lifetime order of protection. And it's based on a status of they've been convicted of aggravated stalking. So if for some reason that aggravated stalking is pardoned or it's set aside by the court, which does happen, there are opportunities to potentially get some of this removed from someone's record if it's a one-time offense, then instead of saying, well, it's going to automatically be removed, the lifetime order of protection, we just put in there that the individual that was under the lifetime order of protection could then petition the court. We put it on their shoulders to go back to court and petition and say, hey, my underlying charge has now been dismissed and doesn't exist, and they can get their rights restored. If that underlying charge has been expunged, pardoned, or removed from their record, then their rights have already been restored in every other way. So, I mean, unfortunately, I hope that doesn't happen very often, but if it did, it just is an opportunity to get back into the court.
Representative Powell? Pass. Representative Carringer?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank Leader Lamberth for bringing this bill. Nikki Goeser is a constituent of mine, and her husband was murdered right in front of her while doing karaoke right here in Nashville in a non-gun-free zone. Nikki is a fabulous person and has suffered for many years worrying about this guy who was in prison continuing to stalk her while in prison. So Nikki has stayed involved, and she's made Tennessee a better state, a safer state, because of continuing to work hard on bringing these new bills and to add to our laws. So thank you, Leader Lamberth, and I know Nikki Goeser truly appreciates all the hard work that's been done down here to protect those future. So thank you.
Leader Lamberth. Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Speaker, sponsor, and thank you for those comments. And I'm sure Mrs. Goeser continues to mourn, and our state has to, as we lose people senselessly to gun violence. Is in this law, if someone is a lifetime stalker or has this ban on them from an individual, are they still allowed to purchase a firearm?
Leader Lamberth.
No, in order to have this lifetime order protection granted, that person's already a convicted felon. They've already been convicted of aggravated stalking, have gone through the whole court system, and that took away their ability to be able to purchase or possess a firearm because they are convicted of that offense. So this doesn't affect that status, but they already would be prohibited.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you elaborate on the question that was asked by my colleague from Davidson County as to whether or not this person would have its right reinstated and be able to petition the court to have access to firearms?
Leader Lamberth.
Again, this in essence is based on their status that they have been convicted of a very specific crime. So we listed murder, rape, robbery. We listed some crimes before because ordinarily an order of protection is granted based on circumstances. Well, before, when we created lifetime order of protection, we said, look, victims of certain violent crimes, they never should have to be around those criminals that have been convicted again. They don't ever want to see them again. There's no restorative justice in those situations. So for aggravated stalking, it's the same thing. But because it's based on that conviction, if the conviction disappears due to a pardon or, again, an expungement of some sort, then that status of that conviction is then gone. So the parties are then back to the point they would have been before the conviction, where a victim could go to court and get a regular order of protection, and we didn't even go that far. We're leaving the lifetime order of protection in place unless the person that has had their rights restored wishes to go back to court and also get the lifetime order of protection lifted. I can't imagine that this is going to happen very often. It's going to take some pretty extraordinary circumstances, and personally, if the parole board's looking at a pardon for someone to make a recommendation to the governor, I would hope, if this passes, that they would look at whether or not there's a lifetime order of protection in place. But if somebody gets a pardon, that conviction's gone.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Therein lies my concern. Given that past violent behavior is the best predictor of future violence, including gun violence, I'm really concerned that someone who has exhibited that type of behavior would then be able to, in any manner or any circumstance, under any percentage of opportunity, get that firearm back in their hands. I mean, we know that's the single best indicator of future violence. So what I hear you say to my colleague from Davidson County is that amendment cracks that door open, maybe small, but that crack is there. Can you address that concern?
Leader Lamberth.
Under the current law, there's no lifetime order of protection for these folks. They get convicted of aggravated stalking. They lose their ability to have a firearm. They may have gone to jail or prison because of that. But once that sentence is over, the only way that the victim can keep that person away from them is go back every single year to court. And so under the current law, the scenario you're talking about is already that person could have the aggravated stalking expunged or pardoned or anything. That could happen right now under current law. The only thing we're changing is we're saying, look, we're creating this lifetime order of protection so those victims won't have to go back every year. But we're basing it on a conviction. If the conviction no longer exists, then it puts the parties back into the position they are under current law.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand what the bill is doing, and I appreciate the intent and spirit of the bill, and I support it. I do think, though, that if that window is open, then perhaps we need to follow this up and address that in another manner, I guess, if it's not inside this bill. And it was my understanding, and I may have been mistaken by the previous question, that the amendment to the bill actually opened that up. So that may be my mistake, and if so, I apologize, but that's what I want a clarification on. Thank you.
Leader Lamberth.
And this body at one point in the future wanted to say that an aggravated stalking conviction can never be removed, and that that's part of the sentence, that there's, that that's attached to somebody, and I don't know that we could affect a pardon, but just about everything else we could. There are ways to close that window. This bill just doesn't deal with that.
Representative Towns.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Sponsor yield. Ladies and gentlemen, most of the people on this floor talking about Nikki, they did not work with her. I happened to work with Nikki a long time. She was a staff member here. She worked here. And you would have to talk to this lady and to see the brokenheartedness that she had, being traumatized by someone that murdered her husband right before her face. It's unconscionable, unthinkable to have to deal with a sapsucker harassing you after something like that. Now, what I think is happening today is that he's saving 2 lives. Because in some situations in the neighborhood, if you're stalking my sister or my mother, you won't need the police. Okay? Because there's some of us that will do something to you about messing with our families. So you're saving 2 lives by doing this. You can take that any way you want to. I don't care how you take it. I'm just letting you know what the facts are. Okay? With me in mind, don't mess with me in mind. And there are other men on this floor will get you, and other men in the neighborhood will get you about doing that old crazy stuff. This girl has been doing so much stuff for such a long time. From a deranged, demonic knucklehead. Okay? It's unconscionable and unpardonable to terrorize a woman or a human being after you murder somebody in their family. See, the police are slow. There's some people can get to you before the police get to you. It's out of line. She's dealt with it for 10, 15, 20 years. And that means that other people are probably dealing with this stuff too. Don't let a punk do that to another human being after murder. Unacceptable.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Leader Lamberth, thank you for bringing the legislation. I too, had a chance to meet Nikki, what was it, last year when we were running this legislation? I think this is a very valuable piece of legislation. And just so y'all know, the pieces of legislation that are being brought forth, if they don't have a direct effect on the mothers of the Covenant School and their families, I'm probably going to be voting no on them, with this one as an exception. And the reason why I'm going to vote yes on this one is because it's meaningful. And no disrespect to any of the rest of the legislation that's been passed, but for the reasons that we're up here, it just is legislation that's being brought forth that has no bearing on saving a life or preventing a death in our state. And I do have a question about this legislation, though, so I can understand the mechanics of it. With this legislation, is there a mental health evaluation that's tied to this law in order for that person to be granted a lifetime restraining order?
Leader Lamberth.
No, sir. They have been convicted of a felony. The felony would be aggravated stalking. And we are saying, due to the egregiousness of that crime, then they have to stay away from their victim forever.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I understand it's based on a conviction, but do you perceive or do you project that it would be a normal occurrence that there will be an order of protection preceding that conviction and lifetime order of protection?
Leader Lamberth.
Not in every case. We've had that bill out there for about 2 years now. There have been a handful filed statewide. But I mean, some victims pursue this and others do not. Some of it depends on whether or not they know about it. Some of it depends on how much the local courts know about it. But I mean, you're probably not going to see this used a lot, but it will be used in the worst of the worst cases. I mean, those aggravated stalkers that have just been a nightmare for their victims. And this is a way, again, an order of protection is just a piece of paper, but every time it's violated, if somebody violates it, that's a new crime. And so this helps that victim who would have to go back every year just go one time. And then they have to face that defendant one time, and then they're good. They don't have to go back to get that piece of paper again.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what happens if the person seeking the order of protection, after 12 years, decides they want to grant grace? Can they have it removed?
Leader Lamberth.
Yes.
Representative Parkinson.
Okay, thank you for that. And as stated earlier, you know, this will probably be the one exception on legislation that I vote for that does not have a direct correlation to preventing gun violence in our state and affecting the lives of those that were affected by the Covenant school shooting. But I appreciate you bringing the legislation. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of House Bill 7003 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Camper, aye. Mr. Clerk, please take the vote.
Ayes 94, no nays.
House Bill 7003, having received the Constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is tabled. Call the next bill, Mr. Clerk.